screen. Oh, yeah, I'll do it in a sec. We'll just kick it off. Thank you, though. Cool. Thank you all for joining. Unfortunately, Nate couldn't make it today. He's in Ireland on his way to the Open Source Summit, so he sends his apologies, but is keen to engage definitely in the future. My name's Jay, as you all know. This is our follow-up working group meeting. We'll be observing the CNCF Code of Conduct. Oh, just seen Alexander's message there. That's all good. That's all good. We'll just do the best what we have since a little bit disruptive start today anyway, so we'll roll with it. But yeah, please feel free to contribute any input, ideas, feedback. We'll just be covering off a couple of things as a bit of recap from some previous sessions, as well as some stuff that's been touched upon briefly in some of the recent contributor meetings, and have a look at a bit of a plan going forward. So without any further ado, I'm just going to share my screen. Nate, Rian and I caught up briefly last week just to touch on a few things ahead of this meeting. And bear with me. Can everyone see that okay?
All fine.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so basically, yeah, I mean, obviously the working group's been, well, we've had a couple of sessions now. It's been over a month, and we've had a bit of an opportunity to identify a few different areas for potential focus, and out of that, obviously, I want to start, offering or suggesting some potential roles and tasks for different people to start sort of focusing on. There's been some really good spread in terms of where different sort of perhaps priority areas might be, in consideration in terms of not how we can just increase contributor numbers, but obviously improve the quality of some of the opportunities and things that that are currently either existing delivery or in development at the moment. I think in general, they could probably be summarized into sort of three main areas at the moment, which is generally around sort of culture, our systems and our processes, and forming a bit of a knowledge base. For instance, with the latter, Nate was mentioning last week, a lot of the information around mentoring is split between either Slack channels or a GitHub repo, and things like that, in terms of trying to encourage new people, and it can be pretty overwhelming for them to be able to navigate and sort of find their way around. So to break that down a little bit further, there's been suggestions around actually establishing a bit of a values base, whether it's something that's aligning with existing, tag contributor or the wider community sort of thing, or perhaps it's something that needs to be a little bit more focused around mentoring specifically, in terms of what might consist or what might sort of live in those knowledge bases around, resources, different sort of training courses and upskilling opportunities for people, mapping pathways and things like that, so people can actually understand what that life cycle might look like. And then there's been some really good input and thoughts around perhaps creating a CRM, different ways of optimizing and organizing a lot of the information that currently exists, and to see how we can sort of feed that into the wider contributor growth strategy. Around improving awareness and profile identity. There's been things talked around perhaps creating a job database. Obviously, they're creating a survey that's due to go out pretty soon to get a better understanding and the lay of the land of what the the general sort of climate is out there. So just having a wider consideration for some of those sorts of aspects as well. And so just as I'm going through this sort of stuff, please feel free to, if I'm going too fast or too slow or anything, to jump in, ask questions as needed. I'll try not to take up too much time, but yeah, please feel free to feed in. And talking most recently about the LFX mentorship, which has just gone into its last intake for the year. There's a little bit of an overview in terms of where it currently sort of sits. It's pretty straightforward as far as the application process and review. the actual sort of duration of the program itself, and different things like work assessments and stipend payments, and most of that, most of the work as far as evaluating progress and performance is either at the sort of at the midpoint or at the end, and not much thereafter. And in terms of what that might look like if we were to sort of integrate a lot of the proposed changes, I think probably looks something a little bit more like this. And as opposed to waiting to that point where people actually start proposing their projects and applications and everything, but the work and the lead up could perhaps begin as much as 3 to 6 months out, whether that be around marketing, whether it be around support for both mentees and mentors, depending on obviously everyone's interest and availability in some of those offerings, and basically more regular engagement points in between, where we can perhaps foster a sense of community internally, we can identify more opportunities to provide support where needed, and if there's any sort of flags in terms of in worst case scenarios where perhaps mentees might be in danger of failing the program, as there is opportunities there where we could perhaps provide support, perhaps help facilitate conversational communication between mentor and mentee, all those sorts of things. And then obviously post-program as well, what are we doing to help track the life cycle of those who graduate? There's been things like a graduation ceremony that's been proposed, perhaps a period there where once we able to source all this sort of feedback and everything, we can actually start implementing and acting upon some of those changes, and even things post-program where we could be perhaps supporting some of those mentees to transition into employment and career opportunities as well, whereas the opportunity to provide some sort of pastoral care, and perhaps not even just in the professional sense. There's obviously mental health is a huge sort of factor nowadays, and if there's whether it's something that we perhaps can provide some sort of support with directly, or perhaps collaborate with other external services, just other things to improve the likelihood of mentee success, and ideally sort of closing out that contributor loop. How can we encourage some of these mentees to ideally sort of move up the ladder, I guess, and hopefully become future contributors / mentors as well. So if we're looking at it in more cyclical sort of nature, it's perhaps progressing through a bit of awareness, transition, the support we're providing throughout the program, and then a lot of the sort of work that comes post-engagement as well. How are we sort of understanding what the needs are, how are we responding to that, and what sort of things are we doing to help bridge that gap back in. So there's quite a few things to consider there, and I think a lot of those ones that have been identified so far, there's a lot of sort of low-hanging fruit, I guess, that we could probably act upon quite quickly, and others that are obviously perhaps in terms of making changes to systems or process, and that might take a little bit more time, but I think for the most part all that's pretty achievable. So it's just been a good opportunity to try and get a bit of an understanding of that. And I'll just touch quickly on some of the stuff in terms of what I've been working on here in New Zealand. I'm conscious that it was raised at a TAG contributor meeting a couple of weeks ago that I unfortunately missed, about some of the stuff that we've been up to, but just to frame some of that quickly. So the last couple of months, we've just been doing a bit of a scoping exercise, engaging quite widely with local education providers, businesses, local government, economic development, and just different local stakeholders to try and get a bit of an understanding in terms of what is the scope or opportunity for to create pathways into some of these mentoring opportunities. So I'm working with local high school to bring them, engaging with local businesses who've expressed interest in perhaps co-developing some sort of mentoring to build a bridge between not just schools but other tertiary providers as well, highlighting a bit more of the skills needs, seeing how that could potentially branch into some of the connections or development opportunities such as Kubernetes, and obviously the mentoring initiatives themselves, and creating a bit of a loop there with other, like I said, economic development agencies and tech collectives. And that's all going to go towards developing our own mentoring initiative for Māori. So it'll be Indigenous framework, hopefully that can be replicated throughout. But it was a good sort of understanding to see, what are the sort of needs in terms of how can that feed into, as I said, existing mentoring initiatives. And some of the clear things that sort of came through is that from a business perspective, a lot of the smaller businesses especially are time poor. And so as much as they see the need and the value in creating some sort of mentoring framework, they just don't necessarily have the time or the resource to be able to develop that. And I think that's echoed quite a lot in terms of how we engage or might engage with a lot of mentors in existing initiatives, is that, a lot of the same sorts of things is echoed as well. It's, everyone's time poor, yet they're absolutely critical to the success of this. So how can we perhaps, take some sorts of learnings that can, be contextualized according to, to different people's conditions and circumstances. So it's something we're just starting, now that we've had an opportunity to sort of get a bit of a read on that. It's going to be a bit of a slower process because obviously we're going quite wide. But the idea is to obviously create something that's a bit bespoke in terms of, our particular demographic here. And so there's a bit of a split in terms of, those that we can transition here who already have the competency and the experience to be able to jump straight to something, straight into the mentorships, and using Kubernetes as a first touch point before perhaps broadening them to wider sort of CNCF projects. And there's a few reasons behind that. I think it's because a lot of it is because most people are generally unfamiliar with open source cloud in general, let alone all the respective projects that come under CNCF. So being able to just focus on one, and perhaps the flagship one in this instance, is probably going to be a little bit easier for people to identify with and digest. And then those who are going to need a little bit more time to sort of wrap their head around everything and transition into it. We've begun developing a bit of a Māori career framework to sort of address that a bit more deliberately and specifically, which will branch into, just considering careers in digital technology. I think I mentioned before, there's only 4% participation for Māori in New Zealand, 2.5% roughly for Pacific Islanders. So that margin's really, really low. So any efforts that we can do there to sort of broaden that, I think is going to be pretty important. And then from there, we can sort of branch into open source. And in parallel to that, even just trying to foster some sort of organic engagement in that space is still going to be beneficial. There's a lot of people who might not necessarily pursue careers in this sort of space in the first instance, but if they're getting more involved and engaged with the tech in general, that's still going to be beneficial. And we might not necessarily recognize those benefits till quite down the track. But again, there's so many ways that people might sort of choose to get on this path. So we're just seeing how we can sort of broaden that engagement approach. And just raising awareness on the value of cloud in general. I mean, New Zealand, unfortunately, we're 5, if not 10 years behind the rest of the world as far as recognizing the benefits and value of cloud. And so there's a lot of broader conversations again that we need to have at the industry and local government level about how we can sort of bridge that gap a little bit more as well. So there's a bit of groundwork that needs to be done, but I think it's in the long run, a lot of that is probably going to increase the value of the quality of what the engagement will look like at this higher level when we're finally ready for it. So we're trying to cover a few bases at once, but again, I think stuff that we're doing here in parallel with anything that we might be doing globally, I think is we'll probably have some contribution overall progress and benefits. So that's sort of high-level view in terms of where things are at the moment. But none of this is set in stone. We're really keen to obviously hear everyone's input about where they think the priority sort of focus should be. and, you know, sort of decide what sort of steps we might take going forward. So, yeah. Any thoughts?
Jay, is that that was great. Thanks so much for explaining and going through that. Is that document that you shared something that you can share with us so that we can also like look at later on?
Yeah, 100%. I've
Awesome.
yeah, sorry, I just sort of touched up on some of that stuff yesterday, but I'll perhaps upload it to a slide or something like that. You guys can sort of break down a little bit more, and feel free to make any changes or suggestions or anything like that as well.
Yeah, it would just, I think it would just be good for us to also kind of be able to refer back to it and see it again and kind of have a better understanding of kind of a lot of the thought process that you obviously you just went into a lot of really great stuff, and I'll know that I'll need to kind of see some of that kind of broken down again for it to kind of stay fresh in my mind, me personally. So yeah, it'd be great if you could share that later on. No rush, obviously, but that would be great to see again.
No, of course, absolutely. Thanks for that. I'll do that after this. And yeah, like I said, it's very much a work in progress. So feel free to break it down, and yeah, definitely push back on anything as well. If anyone doesn't quite feel it's meeting the need. It's like I said, there's a lot of things there that need to be unpacked more. And you know, even in the last sort of week or so, with Nate getting some feedback and correspondence from both mentees and mentors, it's sort of you know, raised a few sort of areas for consideration as well in terms of what else might be factored. So yeah, very keen to iterate it as we go forward. Yeah, so that's sort of where things at the moment. One other thing that's sort of come out of that was Nate has been engaging with Charlie Mann from CNCF, who handles a lot of the marketing stuff, and most recently has been developing the CNCF contributors website, which some of you guys might have seen. And the offer's been put forward as well for us to perhaps create a mentoring version of that, you know, quite a similar sort of format and layout. But again, hopefully more of an accessible sort of point. Or I mean, for anyone, but for new contributors especially. Nate was sort of mentioning an instance where he was, you know, referred, I think it was a family member, to the GitHub repo. And then he sort of thought afterwards, it's like, that's, you know, it might be a bit overwhelming for people who are just, you know, just trying to build their interest and understanding of what the options are. So yeah, were there any thoughts on that? Oh,
I think we got some real positive feedback about the website for the contributors, and it is now very much in the Linux Foundation for Cloud Native Foundation format, and it reads easy and got all the information in one spot. And as we discussed, we'd have the mentoring information all tied up in one place, and not just a repo, because the repo doesn't read all that nicely, and it's not that well laid out. So that would really be helpful to have a place to send people, and if you want to do mentoring, go there and see it all.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, the contributor one that I did recently, yeah, the layout is, like I said, as you say, like really clean. And I think it's, I'm not sure exactly what the you know, the demographics are sort of globally, but I know definitely something like that for us here in New Zealand, you know, walking through you know, different people. I think it's going to be quite beneficial as just a yeah, would be an introductory thing that we can sort of, you know, develop over time. I mean, there's obviously some talk of perhaps as part of that knowledge base, you know, providing links to yeah, other courses and resources and information and stuff like that might sit there as well. So yeah, there's a lot of potential with something like that. So depending on everyone's sort of thoughts and feelings about it, you know, Nate suggested that perhaps at a future meeting, we invite Charlie along, so everyone has an opportunity to sort of, you know, feed into what that might look like there, and you know, have a little bit more sort of direct interaction in terms of you know, shaping the, you know, the need and the purpose of that too. So yeah. I don't actually have too much else at the moment. I know it's a little bit since some of us caught up. Is there anything else that, anything in the lead up or anything that perhaps I've raised before that, sort of stuck out to anyone as a bit of, point of interest or conversation at the moment?
I remember from our first meeting, Jay, I wasn't able to attend the last one. Unfortunately, I was away on an event, but there was this specific site that came up. I'm just linking it in the chat now about whether it's still active. And I was able to find out that yes, this Cloud Native student group absolutely is, as they recently had an event listed there.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we'll be able to get in contact with the folks that are listed there as organizers, one of them being Divya, who's a co-chair with me in a special interest group in the Kubernetes project. But I just want to kind of come back to let this group know that yes, this specific student group is active if we wanted to kind of engage with them on the mentee kind of side of things as well.
Absolutely. Oh, that's awesome. Thanks for checking out that. Yeah, I think that's going to be really, really important about, how we can sort of engage with, obviously, in the first instance, with those who might participate in some of these opportunities, but obviously, how we can maintain some of that, engagement as well. Rian's actually been, looking into following up with some graduates who are just, trying to identify what some of their journeys have been post-program. Some have gone to some really great career opportunities. Some who have cycled back and perhaps taken a couple of mentorships. Perhaps build up their competency or experience before stepping out into the industry. And even from just a sort of high level look there, it's been quite interesting just to sort of see that some of those pathways from those who perhaps started out interning before getting with jobs the likes of Microsoft or Google or Red Hat and all these sorts of things haven't that time frame hasn't been too long, sometimes perhaps 2-3 years, which is I think it's really interesting for those who considering participating or remaining contributors or anything like that. So what was the nature of that event that sort of happened recently? Do you know?
When you mean event, which one are you referring?
Oh, so did you mention that the Cloud Native?
Yes, the student event. Yeah, correct. So they had a specific event on basically for the doc community evaluating Cloud Native storage vendors. And so they've had these kind of I still need to figure out what the I think that means data on Kubernetes, DOK. And so
Okay.
they have these kind of student groups focused on certain kinds of topics. They've been doing specifically online events. And so I think a lot of the Docker data on Kubernetes folks kind of utilize a student group to kind of help them either generally contribute, get feedback on things and so on. And so they specifically did a Cloud Native storage vendors session.
That's awesome. I'm just saying, looking at that link as well, there's over 3,000 members, so it's quite a broad base there, eh?
Yeah. I think it was Josh who brought it up in that first meeting of this would be, if this group is active, it would be a wealth of folks we could kind of tap for possible, collaboration or just kind of input on some of the things that we're working on as possible mentees previously, that kind of thing, or future mentees.
Yeah, that's great. So what would be the suggested way of engaging?
I think just reaching out to the group's
Is a main coordinator or anything, or
organizers.
Oh,
yeah. And so if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that there's a stack there, and Bart Farrell, who's listed there, he's specifically the lead of the data and Kubernetes community.
okay.
So it wouldn't surprise me if he had some stake in organizing the latest event.
Okay.
But I'm in pretty constant contact also with Divya, who's listed as an organizer, as I work with her alongside her. So I could check with her to see what what she recommends would be the best way to engage a group like this, but we'd probably need to kind of have some kind of idea of what we'd probably want to engage in with in the first place. I think there'd probably need to be a good amount of organization on our side too.
Cool. Yeah, agree fully. Yeah, that sounds hugely valuable. And I think that'd be something to look at, perhaps engaging Uche with, who's a graduate as well, because he definitely has some good ideas about student mentee engagement and things as well. So I think he'd like to feed into that if possible. So I'll probably get in touch with him in the meantime too, and perhaps between us all we can sort of coordinate what might be the best sort of approach for engaging with Divya and the likes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I will be hopefully seeing Divya actually in person at KubeCon as well. So we can probably coordinate a bit more there, but we're in touch regularly, so I can she's also in Ireland at the OSS Summit, like Nate. So interestingly, they'll both be out for a little while.
Okay, cool. Oh, that's exciting. Awesome. I think I just saw Josh. Oh, is Josh still here? He popped in for a second. Maybe not.
Didn't see him for a moment.
Yeah. That's right. He's probably tied up. Knowing Josh, he's probably got a few things on the go at once. So no problem. Oh, here he is. Hey, Josh.
I see you're unmuted, but there's no audio.
Maybe some audio issues too. Cool. Yeah, that all sounds pretty good so far. There's something else from one of our past ones. Just double checking our notes. No, I've lost it. My apologies. That sounds a pretty good start from the outset anyway. As I said, Nate's obviously unavailable at the moment, and we've obviously been in touch base very briefly last week. So just wanted to float some of those things that were obviously sort of covered by everyone. In the meantime, just to give a little bit of an update, and as mentioned, I will share that sort of stuff out. But in general, please feel free to reach out anytime. I mean, obviously these are a few weeks apart and everything, but I'm always keen to engage and bounce ideas in the lead up. And I think if we if we can engage a little bit more regularly as needed, we can perhaps put up a bit more momentum on this sort of stuff in the meantime. Oh, serious AV problems. All good, Josh. Because for me personally, I just want to be conscious of anything that I'm sort of developing over here in New Zealand, that it is going to benefit any efforts that we might be making abroad. And I'm still very, very much in the learning phase as well. So I'm very keen to, Oh, Josh is just messaging me again. To sort of learn and leverage off everyone else's collective experience as well. So is there anything else in general that we might need to cover? Although it might be a pretty short and sweet meeting for this one.
I think that might be it. I just added an AI to the agenda for the slides. I think that's the only action item out of today's meeting.
Cool. All good. Sweet. So like I said, I'll share out what some of the stuff we touched upon today. And I said, once I've had enough to had a chance to catch back up with Nate, we'll be in touch again soon. Yeah, and anything in the meantime, yeah, please feel free to reach out, and yeah, we'll take it from there. And I will touch base with Josh now. As he said, he's just mentioned a couple of times that he's having issues, so sends his apologies. So yeah, I'll bring him up to speed as well, and there might be other things to sort of feed in from there. But otherwise, thank you all for taking the time out to be here at the moment. Really appreciate it, and yeah, looking forward to next steps.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Cool, thank
Have a good
you.
day. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.